On this episode of Inside the Mavs, the Dallas Mavericks are in the Western Conference Finals to take on the Minnesota Timberwolves. How they got there, what this series could look like, and what do the Mavericks ultimately have to do to win this series. This is Inside the Mavs. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Postgame host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining us here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Grant Asseth of Mavericks Sports Illustrated joining me here on the episode today as we get you ready for the Mavericks taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. The Mavericks back in the West Finals for the second time in the last 3 years. As I bring in my partner, Grant Asseth here. Grant, what's going on? How we doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm definitely excited to be talking about this Western Conference Finals series. It's been fascinating to talk about this team in terms of what they could accomplish. You know, if so-and-so does this and, they stay patient. And now, we're here with the Western Conference Finals. So it's definitely, exciting time for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing that we have gotten here to this point with this team because, as we kind of look back and reflect on where this team was, what they were able to accomplish at the trade deadline, and really remaking their identity to really springboard them into what was a terrific second half of the year and then carrying that forward into the postseason, dispatching of the Clippers in 6 games, and then doing the same with the Oklahoma City Thunder in 6 games in the conference semifinals to set up this heavyweight fight, if you will, with the Minnesota Timberwolves in the West Final. Before we get into anything with the series in particular, the Mavericks were a team that we thought, had potential to be able to possibly win a playoff series if they got to the postseason, but more so built on the identity of their offense with Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving. But Grant, this team at the trade deadline made 2 important moves, maybe the 2 most important moves of this season, acquiring PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, and remade the identity of their team, and they became one of the best defensive teams in the league during the second half of the season.
Yeah, definitely. And then now when you face, I guess you could say, the poster child of, big teams with, 2-star front court players, and then, Jaden McDaniels, a very tall, long wing as well. Those are definitely moves that you would have liked to have made as opposed to not making, by a significant margin. If you're the Mavs, you're probably sitting back pretty grateful that you made those moves, because if they would have, gotten by who they got by and then hit this point without having size, then that definitely would be, that'd be concerning for sure.
Yeah, and the Mavericks got back to practice on Monday. We had a chance to talk with Dereck Lively and Daniel Gafford, and I asked Gafford, particularly, one of the many reasons why the Mavericks acquired him and PJ Washington was to get the kind of size and physicality to deal with potential teams like the Denver Nuggets, like the Minnesota Timberwolves, because of the size that they present and the length and athleticism they bring, especially on the defensive end. Here's what Gafford told me and told us today when it came to, responding to the idea that now he has a chance to put his imprint on this series, knowing that one of the reasons why he's here is to be able to help the Mavericks deal with a team like Minnesota. Take a listen.
In a lot of ways, you were brought here to help with the size of this team, to deal with a team like Minnesota. What does that mean to you, knowing that this moment is now here, you have a chance to be able to make your imprint on this series against a team like this?
I mean, I'm excited. A day never goes by where I'm not excited to just be able to play another game of basketball. You know, every day isn't promised, and every time you step out on the floor, it's not promised to. You know, I don't want to be that guy that just comes out and it's like, you know, I'm timid, I'm frigid, and just not excited to just be in the position that I am in today. You know, I I give my thanks to the man upstairs because, you know, I couldn't have been in this position. I could be home right now. You know, so just thinking on that, I'm going to give pretty much all effort that I can to just be able to, you know, make the best of everything when it comes to this series and the series, you know, ahead. But it's just one game at a time and just having patience with it. And like I said, just poise and just being ready for the next thing.
And Grant, this team is going to need Gafford and Dereck Lively to deal with a difficult front line in the Minnesota Timberwolves. But his acquisition, along with PJ Washington at the trade deadline, helped this defense become arguably the best defense during the second half of the year. What has Gafford's presence, along with Washington, meant based on what you've observed and broken down in terms of what you've seen observing this team and what that could mean going into this series against the Timberwolves?
Yeah, definitely. I think starting with PJ Washington, having multiple big wings with athleticism and length, that makes a big difference when you're trying to stop some of the better teams in the NBA who have multiple options to attack. Like against Oklahoma City, you need to have that type of talent to be able to stop a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, be able to handle a Jalen Williams, and then now you're going to be facing an Anthony Edwards. That's going to be a very tall task, but also Karl Anthony Towns, very big player, basically a center playing the 4 spot. You do have to have big wings that can make it uncomfortable for him when he's putting it on the floor and be able to get out and contest him when he's shooting the ball. And having wings with size and athleticism allows you to have that ability to stop like a smaller, quicker player like Jalen Williams in comparison, while also being capable of handling someone like Karl Anthony Towns. So it'll be interesting to see the application of that. And then the depth of rim protection is huge. Some teams only have one rim protector, and there's so much made about foul trouble and just struggles in general. Like if someone's just not on their game and it's your only rim protector, that's a problem. But for the Mavericks, we even saw with Daniel Gafford. I think you can see with like plus minus isn't like the end all be all, but it wasn't necessarily like his best game at times during the Thunder series. And Dereck Lively picked up behind him and was, a significant positive, like in that Game 6 win, and was a very big difference maker. And he was, really, on point as the anchor of the defense, and especially when you consider the fact that, they kind of switched between man and zone and man, throughout that second half. And when you have, 2 talkative rim protectors that are, more than willing to call out and communicate, everything that needs to happen on the floor, that makes a big difference. And, again, some teams only have one of those guys. And then it's a schematic thing where you're trying to just neutralize and get that guy off the floor, put him in bad spots or foul trouble. And the Mavericks are able to have that luxury of having 2 of them to be able to insulate themselves from the downsides that other teams face. So I think it's been huge. And just overall, that theme of size just on this team, it sounds so simple, but when you really see, all these teams match up, it makes a huge difference when you're not playing a lot of these smaller, 4 guards sometimes groups trying to stop some of these really big teams.
More on this when it comes to the Mavericks taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves, the impacts of Daniel Gafford, Dereck Lively, and what that means against this front court against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And, of course, the sexiest matchup that we could get with Luka Dončić versus Anthony Edwards. All of that and more. But coming up right now, let's take a quick break here on Inside the Mavs. Let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast. Let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Thank you for hanging out with us for that spot, and thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, in Aura. Grant Afseth here with me on the Inside the Mavs podcast as the Mavericks get ready to take on the Minnesota Timberwolves, as the Mavericks are back in the Western Conference Finals for the second time in the last 3 years. And, you know, Grant, talking about the impacts of these players we were talking about with PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, but Dereck Lively, especially in the Oklahoma City Thunder series, we started to see him come on during the Clippers series, and he got better as that series went on, and he took it up to another level in the series against the Thunder, particularly in the closeout game, where he became the youngest player in NBA history to have at least 15 rebounds in a playoff game, and was a whopping plus 71 in that series against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm just marveling at his impact for this team, and the fact that we talked about, you know, reflecting on what this year has been, going all the way back to the draft, and the fact that the Mavericks, after what they went through last year, finishing 5-11 with Kyrie and Luka in the starting lineup, finishing 38-44, missing the playoffs all in its entirety, to now this moment now where Dereck Lively has been a significant contributor to this team and really came on at the end of the Thunder series. How do you think he will match up dealing with Karl Anthony Towns, dealing with Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid's NBA Sixth Man of the Year, and what that means for this series for the Mavericks?
Yeah, I think something that I've noticed with Dereck Lively since the start of his Mavericks journey, I guess you could describe it as, is he's someone that is a very fast learner, but also when he has multiple chances to see the same matchup or just situation, he responds very well to that. And no better team than to face the Minnesota Timberwolves when he played them in Abu Dhabi, his first taste of, you know, I guess you could say if you exclude NBA Summer League, where the veterans aren't really on that team. He still faced like a Chet Holmgren, so not to diminish the value of that developmental experience, but like the regular Minnesota Timberwolves, he saw them twice. This team could potentially play, or these two teams could face off maybe 10 plus times when you factor in 4 regular season matchups, 2 preseason, and 4 to 7 potential playoff games. So no better team than to see the same one over and over and over again for him. And that's why I think will be something that plays to his advantage. He's, definitely attentive to detail, and, especially when you have all this time to build continuity with your roster around you, learn the NBA game. He can reflect on how previous matchups have gone, but also this defense as a team has really benefited from, being able to switch up their schemes in ways they were just not able to do at earlier points of the season. Like, as we mentioned before the break, the ability to, I guess you could say, toggle between the man to zone and zone to man, really throws off some of these, these offenses that maybe are a little bit, like it's in the NBA, can be robotic at times, where, you're kind of expecting a certain read when you're running a certain action and expecting a certain defense. And then you see something different. Sometimes these guys have to take risks on a couple of possessions where you're like, wait, why did he do that? Well, because when you mix it up, they have to actually see what's being used and ran, and like how the defense is reacting and playing them. So that having someone who talks so much on defense like him and has multiple previous experience against this particular group, I think will feed into his advantage. And it's not going to be easy, obviously, against a really talented defensive center and, play finisher like Rudy Gobert. And then Karl Towns has a ton of versatility as well. So I'm definitely curious to see how both front courts kind of handle each other. Like if there's going to be any cross matching, the type of ball screen coverages, zones, and all that stuff. Because in previous situations, the Mavericks did not have the rim protection they have now at all when they faced Rudy Gobert in the postseason. And they did a pretty good job of neutralizing him. Like, they made it uncomfortable for him in pick and roll. But also Rudy Gobert didn't have the luxury of playing next to another front court guy like Karl Towns in Utah. So definitely going to be a intriguing overall, set of circumstances. And then also the other side of that with the Mavericks offense, Rudy Gobert is, in the paint for a very heavy portion of time, 7'9" wingspan, if I remember correctly. So that's, that's going to be very tough for an offense that loves to run pick and roll. They're going to have to be very cognizant of their spacing, their timing, and, be very diligent about creating those advantages. So it'll be a fantastic test for, Dereck Lively for sure.
Yeah, and for Lively, you saw at points during, the Clippers and the Thunder series, his ability to kind of be a one-man defense, whether it be being able to show and drop and still be able to recover and use his length and athleticism to cover multiple areas on the floor, really being able to provide versatility for that Mavericks defense. And when this defense for the Mavericks is at their best, they're swarming, they're flying around, making the kinds of rotations and being able to close out possessions to really get themselves out in transition, which we know that was a focal point of this season for the Mavericks, was to get more up and down in transition, to play with more pace, to be able to put pressure on opposing teams. And, we talk about pressure, there's no better stage for the pressure to be felt than obviously in a conference finals with an attempt to get to the NBA finals. Luka Dončić has been there before a couple of years ago. Anthony Edwards making his introduction onto this stage in the conference finals. And for Edwards, he's turned into one of the faces of the league. He's a hell of a quote. He's always got something to say, whether it be to his team or to the media or to his opponent. He's going to be a fun cover in this series, but obviously the matchup, Luka Dončić, Anthony Edwards. Luka Dončić finishing up the Thunder series with 3 consecutive triple-doubles. Anthony Edwards averaging over 27 points per game in the conference semifinals against the Denver Nuggets. Let's start with Anthony Edwards, though, because as hyper-athletic as he is, he's got a great handle, he can shoot, but he's also a willing and very talented defender as well. What are you looking at from a defensive standpoint for the Mavericks to try and get after Anthony Edwards, knowing how versatile of a player that he is, especially on the offensive end?
Yeah, I think for the most part, you definitely have to mix up, like as we talked about the importance of being able to do that, you have to mix up your coverages against him, because I think if you look at the 2 series the Mavericks are coming off of, like with, facing Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think he's a better, decision maker and processor with, making passing reads. And I think for, to really kind of pressure the Timberwolves, you're going to have to put Anthony Edwards in situations where he is making those reads. And that's not to say he can't. I think there's almost like I guess you could say like a situation where when you are so athletic and so explosive, there are times where you don't really have to do that to such a degree that other players do, to where you're just used to turning the corner and exploding. And then, you got to be able to make it uncomfortable for him to, kind of hit the gap and explode, where he can't just kind of, go into second nature or just natural stuff where he's just like, he's used to run of the mill, like turning the corner and launching. You got to meet him at different, points with ball screen coverages. You got to make him see some of that one man zone sometimes. Like he's going to have to finish through Dereck Lively. And then, a lot of that is made possible when you have the commitment of superstars like Luka and Kyrie to make those extra efforts on the perimeter. Cause like even Luka's running shooters off the line, like pretty frequently, and doing, forcing like guys like Lou Dort into flybys. You got to force guys like Jaden McDaniels into those situations too, to really tie the unit together and be able to, kind of deter Anthony Edwards from being that aggressive scorer at times and having to trust his teammates. It becomes one of those cliche things where it's like, now I'm talking about like the 5-man unit approach of like, it takes 5 guys to guard one. It really does. It's a game within a game for sure. So I think definitely just not letting him hit open space and exploding. You got to make him change directions, get to a second, third move, because also Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I feel like he's more of an east to west scorer than Anthony Edwards is as well too. Like, and he's also got a better, I would say, like short range jump shot where he can really just get to a spot. He's got crazy ability to just change directions and stay balanced. I think Anthony Edwards is good at that stuff too, but it's like, I think that's where The Mavericks' core defensive identity might be better off just a little bit facing Anthony Edwards than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for those reasons. But also, the Mavericks are going to have to actually have that size pay off for them too, where yes, like the defensive identity has been like very effective when there is a weak shooter to punish, but that has to be, those plays have to be finished with that size, cleaning up on the glass. And if you don't, then you're kind of still at what was a strength in other matchups becomes like kind of neutral or a slight disadvantage. And that's where you get into problems where you're requiring even more from the perimeter player. So I think overall, Anthony Edwards definitely got to make him see different stuff and just not let him get comfortable attacking space. But also you have to respect his step back three because that's something when he gets going, he can really make you pay. And then you start loading up on that, and then he hits you with the hezzy move where he's just attacking downhill and making you look stupid. So like he did that a couple of times against Denver when I was watching. So the little stuff like that, you can't let it compound. And definitely going to be curious to see how they approach it in terms of matchups, how they keep certain defenders on them. Derek Jones, I think, definitely has some intriguing tools with his length and his ability to like really like recover after, change of direction happens. And he's been able to block some players that you just rarely ever see get blocked, like Kevin Durant, all kinds of players throughout this season. So definitely going to be, a fun thing to watch.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things there. Number one, Anthony Edwards' ability to get downhill. He's an explosive athlete who could take the ball off the dribble and could put one on your head real quick if you're not paying attention. And you talked about his step back three. The amount of space that he can clear on that step back is kind of frightening because of his ability to not only use his quickness, but he takes that step and he's able to get back there as quickly as he can. And he's got a decently quick enough release to be able to get it off to where even if you have enough time to try to recover, the shot's already been released. And next thing you know, he's draining the three-pointer. And I do wonder with Edwards how much physicality the Mavericks will attempt to test with him to try, as you mentioned, give him different looks, be able to try to get him off the spots. But with Derek Jones Jr. or PJ Washington at times, utilizing their length to be able to try and bother what Anthony Edwards does. I think Derek Jones Jr. from an athletic standpoint, I think could be able to give Anthony Edwards some problems there. We talked about the idea of him blocking some three-point shots. He did that a ton against the Clippers in that series, whether it be Paul George or James Harden. You saw it at times against the Thunder as well. That, to me, is going to be a fascinating matchup, how Derek Jones Jr. adjusts to be able to deal with the quickness and the speed and really the power of Anthony Edwards as well, and how that will shape the series, because if they are able to do some things to be able to slow him down a little bit, now you're forcing Karl Anthony Towns, you're forcing Mike Conley, some of these other guys to have to be able to account for some of that scoring. And the Mavericks have done a decent enough job. In fact, it was ironic because in the double-digit loss that they had at the beginning of the season, where the Mavericks lost by 18 or 19, Anthony Edwards was held under double-digit points. In fact, I believe he was like it was some bad numbers.
Yeah, he shot really poorly. It was like the front court matchups were a nightmare for Dallas.
Exactly. And I wonder how much they can take for some of that, because, one thing that we'll get to here is this Mavericks team is completely different than the one that the Timberwolves saw. In fact, the Timberwolves and the Mavericks haven't played each other since January 31st. And that means that they have not seen the Timberwolves have not seen this version of the Mavericks. How do you think that will play itself out, knowing how much different this version of the Mavericks are versus what they played, in terms of the Timberwolves earlier on in the season, where at times Kyrie wasn't in the lineup, at times Luka wasn't in the lineup, and what that means for this series now?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that Thunder series as well too, where a lot of those matchups were before the trade deadline. So there was injuries because I definitely, as someone who did go to for better or worse at times to all 82 games, I took some closer to meaningless than meaningful trips to both Minneapolis and Oklahoma City, where it was like Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, and Dwight Powell.
Yes.
that are out there. So definitely not much you could take away necessarily from that standpoint for the Timberwolves perspective. But I guess in a weird way, if you are going to trust some of those players like a Josh Green, Jaden Hardy, they kind of get a little bit of a benefit because they can reflect on having too much responsibility in terms of like their normal role, and then be like, yeah, that was really tough. Chet is going to block me here. Rudy's going to block me here, or this is kind of hard to get to this spot. They had more opportunity and leeway to test within their capabilities against those guys in those previous matchups. But it plays into a little bit of that Mavericks, the top players benefit as well too, because there's less film on them against, for the Timberwolves to be able to reflect on how they guarded them and all that stuff. But, I think if you look back to, shortly after, Kyrie got to Dallas, I think it was his home debut. That was where he scored like a crazy amount of points in the fourth quarter. But then, Dallas, they had some kind of that's where the hot potato conversation began, where, Jaden McDaniels really blew up that final play where they had an opportunity to close out and make a big play. And that's, I guess you could say when you compare it to those previous situations, even back then, you can look at the film from that, but this duo and this team has grown and changed a lot since even then, to where I don't know if there's going to be too much they can take away from it. But also, Dallas, they're going to be able to get creative, I think, offensively as well, too, where you have the luxury of having two superstars now that are really comfortable with each other compared to those like really previous situations when they were together. And, we saw like, it was a bit of a struggle against Oklahoma City for Kyrie to get going as a scorer, since they were so committed to doubling him. And they were, they have the athleticism and the length to really, commit to that. And then dare Luka to kind of, do what Luka does with, facing the blitzes and everything. But I think Minnesota's at a different position where that's tougher for them to do. And you're asking some of your better offensive players to commit to that if you are going to do that. Like you probably don't want to tax Anthony Edwards or Karl Towns. So this is a series where I feel like you can probably review it and see better opportunities for Kyrie to get going as well, especially with, size has a disadvantage against speed as well. So putting multiple bigger, slower players into actions ties into Kyrie's benefit, someone who really thrives against drop coverage. Even whether you look at his biggest games of the year against the Knicks, they frequently, played traditional ball screen coverages when Luka did not play, and Kyrie scored like 45 and had 10 assists. And Kyrie's had some big games against, Minnesota as well too. So I think individually they can kind of review their previous, successes against similar schemes, and particularly the Timberwolves as well, and benefit from that. But it does tie into their benefit, where I think, the Timberwolves don't really have that film, that deep like film room archive of this current current version of the Mavericks, for better or worse, for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Anthony Edwards has already come out and said, look, I'm going to be the one guarding Kyrie Irving. And I told him, all right, young man, be careful what you wish for, because, look, Anthony Edwards is a terrific talent, but Kyrie Irving has been there. And I think there was respect there in those comments because of the competitor that Anthony Edwards is. But we know when Kyrie Irving gets those competitive juices flowing, whether it be offensively, and now what we're seeing, especially on the defensive end, he's still one of the best finishers that the game has ever seen. And now, with having gotten past that Oklahoma City Thunder series, I wonder how much more aggressive he will now be, because even with the turns that Anthony Edwards is going to take guarding Kyrie Irving, there'll be plenty of Mike Conley on Kyrie Irving as well, I would believe, in this series as well. And I'm sure Kyrie Irving would be able to enjoy the opportunity to get after Conley a little bit more as far as this series is concerned. But when you look at this matchup overall, we've talked about, the different aspects when it comes to the defense, attacking Anthony Edwards, defensively what the Timberwolves will want to do against Luka Dončić. These series, as we know, come down to the stars. Luka and Kyrie, obviously, for the Mavericks. Anthony Edwards, to a lesser degree, a bit in Karl Anthony Towns, who's a terrific shooting big man. And Rudy Gobert, who won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year. And an X factor for me, and we talked about it a little bit even before the show, Naz Reid has been spectacular this season, particularly against the Dallas Mavericks. And you saw him play really big-time minutes, especially in the closeout game in Game 7 against the Denver Nuggets. His ability to shoot from 3, to be able to put the ball on the floor, finish in transition. What kind of issues are the Mavericks going to be facing with a guy like Naz Reid, who is as talented as he is, as I mentioned, the NBA Sixth Man of the Year, and how that could play itself out in terms of the depth that the Timberwolves have versus the depth that the Dallas Mavericks have in this series.
Yeah, it's like, for as much as we talk about how deep the Mavericks, benefit from being deep with two center rim protectors, the Timberwolves benefit from having two really skilled front court perimeter guys with Karl Towns and Naz Reid. It's very tough to account for that, throughout a full 48 minutes, where you're really going to have to commit to getting out on the perimeter. You're going to have to swarm around, and you're going to have to be cognizant about how you're making those closeouts. Because he's very effective, pick and pop shooter. He can, really space out, and, he's willing to take the, some contested shots as well too. So you have to get out on him and respect that, which then makes it harder to account for other players on the court as well too. And it becomes that give and take where, if you close out a little short, you're giving up a clean shot. And if you're running him off the line, he's a pretty, agile, big player as well too, who's skilled. He can go and make the back line of the defense pay on the finish. So definitely going to be a fascinating matchup, within the series. And, shooting bigs have definitely been something that the Mavericks have had to, improve dealing with. They really struggled, as we've talked about, against like the Miles Turners, the Kristaps Porzingis, type of stretch fives, and, shooting fours sometimes too, if they're not playing the five. That's definitely going to be, a good measuring stick for the Mavericks, ultimate defensive potential, where, without Maxey, at the very least to start the series, be able to kind of see how they can handle that. I feel that they have shown improvement, like against Chet Holmgren. I mean, Chet Holmgren didn't shoot the ball well, but, that's part of it, is the defensive execution. It's not like they were letting him shoot all day, and he he borrowed Josh Giddey's jump shot. It's not like he did that or anything. Like how they can really lock in on it and execute in this playoff setting will definitely be a big X factor, as you said, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong when there's a lot of players that have the ability to make you pay on the catch and shoot, and also get into the gap of the defense when you have to respect them as that shooter and either fly by or run them off the line. It makes it definitely a challenging situation. And if they're playing next to Karl Towns or Rudy Gobert, you have to really, really be cognizant of dealing with the rebounding situation as well too. Cause that's, if you're out of position because you had to, have that extra effort with Naz Reid getting downhill off the catch, then you're giving up potential rebounding opportunities for Rudy Gobert to get a putback and stuff like that, which is an even higher percentage shot than the one that you're giving, Naz Reid. So definitely a big reason why, when we talk about these teams at this point of the season, why they are where they are, there's a lot of, little variables and factors to take into consideration when doing, pretty much every element, on either side of the ball.
Yeah, when you get to this point in the season, all the teams are good. Even when you look at what's going on in the Eastern Conference, with the Indiana Pacers and the Boston Celtics, you can say what you want about the Celtics and the run that they've been able to go on against the competition that they had, and even the Pacers having to deal with two teams that were, dealing with significant injuries, whether it be the Bucks with Giannis and Damian Lillard, and of course, the New York Knicks, who were a mash unit by the time, their series ended, in New York in 7 games. But all these teams are good. And when Reid, legitimate 6'9", guy that can shoot and put the ball on the floor, does a lot of really good things well. I'm just impressed with how deep this Timberwolves team is, because we haven't even mentioned guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's really good on the defensive end as well. They've got a lot of guys with a lot of different skill sets that can present real problems for this team. And, for the Mavericks, though, the matchup for them, I feel a lot better about their size being able to match up. And hopefully, from a health standpoint, for Luka Dončić having some extra days off to be able to get that knee and that ankle right, we started to see him play and move a little bit better as the series went on. I do wonder how much physical taxing this series will be on him, knowing what kind of defense this team and the Timberwolves present. Of course, they were the #1 defensive team in the league this year. That, to me, is going to be an X factor from the Maverick side, is how much more does Luka have left based on what he's already put himself through body-wise to be able to have the kind of effect on this series, because offensively, they're going to need him to be that guy, primarily handle the basketball and the responsibilities that come with that. But all of that hinges, I think, offensively for the Mavericks on how healthy Luka is going to be, which means everybody else getting involved based off of what he's able to do going forward in the series, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you kind of look back at the timeline of the last week or so, at least there was opportunity for him to get that 2-day gap.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, before. Honestly, I'm losing track of my days now. But
It was
before
before
game
Game
was it
Six,
before game
between
6? Was it
yeah,
before game
exactly
6?
before between games 5 and 6 in the Thunder series. Yeah.
Yeah, so 2 days off then, and then potentially or 3 full days after that game as well too. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
instead of having to play that extra game 7 like the Timberwolves and the Nuggets had to do, that's a big luxury for Luka to be able to have. That's not too much of a workload, relatively speaking, but also. I guess you could say when you look at this team, they are someone that will even admit they are not I guess you could say they're not effective when they have too much time off
That's
as
very
well
true.
too. Like
It's very
after
true.
the All-Star break, some of those like really long gaps. So I hopefully for their sake, they're in that little sweet spot where you know what I mean. Like they
Yes.
had enough rest, but not too much rest as well
Mm-hmm.
too. Because I remember Jason Kidd making a joke about that not too long ago, where they're just not that good when they have a lot of time off. But
Yeah, they haven't been great coming off a long rest. Like I said, it's a difficult place to find where you want your guys, especially in Luka's case, to be able to get the rest that he needs, but also staying in that kind of rhythm based on how well that they've been playing and wanting to get back on the floor as quickly as you can. But still, again, finding that balance is difficult during this time of the year. And hopefully the Mavericks can strike that when it comes to getting ready to go on the road when they take on Minnesota for game 1 on Wednesday, because these games will be played every other day. Like that's where we are, whether Eastern Conference Finals, Western Conference Finals. We're playing these games every other day as we get toward, the NBA Finals. But, before we end today, I want to ask you about that real quick because, the 4 teams that we got left, we've got Minnesota, we've got Dallas, we've got Boston, and we've got Indiana. 3 of the teams we didn't necessarily expect to be here. Boston, obviously, we have felt like throughout the course of the year has been not just the best team in the East, but one of the best teams in the league. What are your just overall thoughts on these matchups, given 4 very different teams and how they've gotten to these conference finals and what you're looking for quickly in both of those series?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Boston was pretty much an expectation, especially with the injuries that the rest of the Eastern Conference started to have pile up. I think the Pacers are an interesting one because Tyrese Halliburton's had a very up and down, post All-Star break. Really for a large chunk of time since the in-season tournament. But having a guy like Miles Turner as a stretch 5, Pascal Siakam's been big for them as well too. They're a very interesting team. Any team that has 3 standout players like that, some role players like TJ McConnell to step up
He was
at the
so
right
oh
time.
my gosh, McConnell
Yeah,
was so
like
good
that.
in
That
game
is a
7.
difference
Yes.
maker for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you got like Minnesota as well. Like they're a very tough defense. We talked a lot about them already, but I think it's just going to be how much at this time of year can these teams stick to their identity when they're facing teams that really stress test that, and then because against the Thunder, the Mavericks were able to put them in situations where they had to really trust their I guess you could say their numbers game sort of research approach where we like our process, we're going to live with it. And we lost the series. It kind of reminds me of the 2022 Western Conference Finals in a way, where the
Yeah.
Mavericks were the shot quality champions. You were hard pressed to find a Western Conference Finals game where the Mavericks lost the shot quality score against the Warriors.
Mhm.
They didn't. They didn't end
It
up
didn't
winning.
work out well.
That was essentially gentleman's sweep territory right there.
Uh-huh.
So definitely, if your identity translates to results, that's what you would like to see at this time of year. And the best teams put other teams in positions where they have to kind of adjust on the fly and second guess their core decision making on how they want to approach the game.
The irony of these 4 teams in it is that, let's say the Mavericks do find their way to the NBA Finals, and by just miraculous effort, the Indiana Pacers get to the NBA Finals. We would actually have a matchup of the Dallas Mavericks taking on Rick Carlisle in the NBA Finals. Like that is a real possibility with the conference finals setup that we have. I'm not gonna lie to you, that would be a hell of a story if the Mavericks and the Pacers got to the NBA Finals and Rick Carlisle's coaching against the team that he was able to help deliver a championship to. And I guess in some ways in Boston, it's kind of the same way. I mean, hopefully for Porzingis, he gets healthy. He's expected to miss the first couple of games in that series against the Pacers. But if the Celtics go on to the NBA Finals, they take on the Mavericks. Hello, old friend, Kristaps Porzingis. The Mavericks would see him in the NBA Finals. So a lot of intrigue in these conference finals, but obviously for us here, when it comes to Inside the Mavs, the Dallas Mavericks looking to get back to the NBA Finals for the first time since 2011, where, of course, they won the NBA championship against LeBron and the Miami Heat. Grant, tell the folks where they can find you and what you got going on there, and what can we expect in terms of coverage for you when it comes to the conference finals here for the Mavericks.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to do a lot of content, live from Minneapolis and Dallas throughout the whole series. You can find that on mavericksgameday.com. That's the URL for that SI Mavericks site that I do all that content on. And then my channel as well. I have a lot of press conferences, video stuff where I'm breaking down, different like intriguing stuff that happens during the series and the playoffs. And then you can find that it's just basically my full name, Grant Afseth. It's one of the luxuries of having one of those names, weird ones that other people don't really have. So AFSETH. You can pretty much find that anywhere for sure.
Yes, if you're not subscribed to Grant's YouTube channel, I implore you to do so. It's a lot of terrific content on there, breakdowns, interviews, press conferences, all the coverage that you're looking for when it comes to these Dallas Mavericks. Grant's providing that. So I encourage you to definitely subscribe to Grant's channel at Grant Afseth on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast, wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, please like and comment on the video. Let us know how you're feeling about the Mavericks as they get ready to take on the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. We'll continue to have our podcast daily leading up to this series, of course, with game recaps and podcasts after each one of these games during the conference finals as well. So plenty of coverage here when it comes to Inside the Mavs. That's it for this episode of our show. Again, thank you for joining us here on Inside the Mavs. You can follow Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth, and you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. For Grant, my name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs.